In this section, we're going to be looking at the psychology of scarcity. We're going to explore three things: the psychology of scarcity itself, the effect that this has on people's bandwidth, i.e. on their ability to make good decisions, and finally, we're going to look at what this means for helping people who are living in poverty. We're going to base our exploration of this topic on a book called Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means So Much. This is a seminal book in the area of the psychology of scarcity. And its central thesis is that when we don't have enough of something, whether it's money or time, it actually affects our ability to make rational decisions. We're going to take a couple of minutes now to look at a short video in which the book's co-author, Eldar Shafir, explains how scarcity affects your ability to make good decisions.
We are going to introduce something very different today, which is the psychology of people who don't have enough. Okay, what happens in the psychology of when you find yourself simply not having enough? And so what I'm going to do now is take a shift and tell you what we got to, which is no longer about the poor. We started from the poor. We discovered a psychology. It's a psychology of what happens when somebody's under scarcity. And what you'll see, what we're trying to convince you of, is that the problems that the poor in money show are very similar to those shown by those who are poor in social connections or in time or in other areas where we experience scarcity. It's what we call the psychology of scarcity. And the argument is actually quite simple. The conditions of scarcity, the conditions of not having enough, create a very special psychology. And that psychology, when you exhibit it in conditions where you don't have enough, makes bad things happen. Okay, so that's going to be the argument. Now, we use a metaphor. I'll give it to you, and the book is developed a bit further. But you can think of your budget as a suitcase. Some of us have a very tight suitcase with things hardly fit, and some have a large suitcase with lots of slack in it. Life is a lot easier with a large suitcase with slack in it, because you need to plan a lot less carefully, because when you go on a trip and your suitcase is very large, you toss all the things you need, and by the time you run out of space, the things left out are the things you need much less. The marginal utility of those things is low. When your suitcase is very small, you toss a few things you need badly and already you're out of space. You have to start deciding, what do I put in, what do I take out? The whole logic of packing, how much time you have to attend to packing. If your suitcase is very tiny, you have to pay attention. If I put this, this doesn't fit. Which shoes are bigger? Which ones are squishier? When your suitcase is big, all that doesn't matter. When you walk on the streets of Aspen, you see a pair of shoes you like, you ask yourself, is the price right? And if it is, and your suitcase is big, you just toss them in the suitcase. If your suitcase is very small and tight, you ask yourself, is the price right? And now, what do I take out of my suitcase to make room for these shoes? You have to think trade-offs. You have to attend to what you're doing. It's a lot of work. So that's going to be part of the story, is that packing a very tight suitcase, living with a very limited budget, requires a lot of attention, leads to more error, and creates difficulties.
The suitcase metaphor resonates with all of us. We can see how the constraints of that small suitcase limit our ability to think big picture, because we're always balancing trade-offs, and it also limits our ability to take advantage of opportunities that we happen to come across, like the new shoes. So how does someone living with scarcity, someone with that small suitcase, end up making decisions? What we've learned is that scarcity tends to lead to behavioral biases. Behavioral biases are essentially decision-making shortcuts. So here are some of the behavioral biases that people struggling with scarcity often use to affect their decision-making. The hassle factor is a way of avoiding taking constructive action because of the perceived hassle of doing so. Some solutions to this are to encourage planning the specific action, setting deadlines, and encouraging people to be accompanied by somebody they trust. Another behavioral bias that's quite common is to make a decision based on following the crowd, i.e. doing exactly the same things your friends and family do, even if that may not be the best option. Some of the solutions for this kind of behavioral bias are to encourage actively comparing rates, looking for advice from a new and trusted advisor who has some expertise in this area. And finally, regret aversion. One of the reasons that people are sometimes challenged to make a decision when they're in positions of scarcity is that they're afraid of making the wrong decision, and therefore they make no decision. Some ways to deal with this kind of behavioral bias are to deliberately consider the risks involved of taking no action. Make a pro and con list. Set a deadline to make a decision, and look for support in doing that. Changing financial habits isn't easy for anyone, and it can be especially challenging for people who are dealing with scarcity. One of the things we've learned is that by helping people link changes in behavior to their immediate financial goals, we can make our teachings and our support much more meaningful and much more likely to be successful. So here are some ways of connecting financial education with action. First, increasing financial knowledge and confidence can be the first step towards putting their new knowledge into action. Encourage action planning and goal setting. Connect the new knowledge that you're delivering with the motivations and life context of the participants in your sessions. And time financial education to relevant moments in their lives. We've learned that this can significantly improve the retention of financial knowledge and behavior change. You'll be delivering these financial literacy sessions in a group setting, so you're not going to be having one-on-one conversations. But people will be asking questions, and you may well be asked questions one-on-one following your presentation. You may also find that people in the group will want to share stories and examples that relate directly to what you're talking about. So we really want to impress the importance of listening. Focused listening is such an important skill. It can help you verbally acknowledge, clarify, challenge, and validate the information that you are presenting. It's really important to pay attention to the people in the room. Reflect on what they're saying, and keep your judgments and your self-talk in the background on very low volume. Words are also important, the language that you use to deliver your session as a facilitator. Words are important. The words we use every day define our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, and they drive our actions. So when you're delivering your sessions, empowering language is really important. What's empowering language? Well, it's responsible, it's motivating, and it's energizing. It's also really important to choose language that is non-judgmental. Respect that people have different values and different attitudes towards money. And finally, use clear language. Remember that many of the participants in your sessions may have modest literacy levels or be new to speaking English. One effective tactic to engaging your participants is to use powerful questions. So what are powerful questions? Well, first of all, powerful questions are open-ended questions. They help people tap into their own guidance and their own knowledge. They also invite the individual to be curious about themselves. You're not presuming to know the answer to their questions. You're inviting them to question themselves. Powerful questions also help create awareness. They demonstrate that you believe that the individual has their own answers, the capacity to reach them. Powerful questions are short and simple. They tend to start with who, what, where, when, how. They're not judgmental, and they are very, very strong on curiosity of trying to understand. So here's some examples of powerful questions. What savings goal would be most helpful right now? Who could be a good resource in your community to help you with tax filing? When would be a good time to review your expenses and income? Where are the nearest banks or credit unions to open a new account? How much can you set aside each month towards your goal? Be very careful with questions beginning with why. Why questions can often sound judgmental, and many of the people in your group may have been subject to a lot of judgments in their life, from employers, from social assistance programs, and questions beginning with why can really challenge your ability to establish trust. If your participants think that your questioning is actually a kind of indirect judgment, it could prevent them from having a genuine conversation and prevent you from establishing trust. It's also important that the participants perceive your questions as a form of collaboration, that your intent is to help them, to work with them so they can be successful.